What's going on? Welcome to the Shonee Jackson Show, episode 7. Please like and subscribe if you like the content I'm making. Continue to watch. Follow me on the socials. Today, we got a loaded college football show again. I'm going to talk about the flip yesterday of Josiah Sharma flipping from Oregon to Texas, one of the best interior defensive linemen in the country, getting the ball rolling on that side of the ball in recruitment and in general, swinging momentum back in the direction towards Texas that seemed to have completely been gone over the last 2-3 weeks over or so, maybe the last month or so in the recruiting world. Going to talk about that, the recruiting momentum with Jonah Williams, and give you my comments on SEC Media Days that happened last week. Nick Saban's comments on Texas, what I took from that, Lane Kiffin's situation with Paul Eraserhead Feinbaum, Steve Sarkisian's press conference, along with Quinn Ewers and the players, and then a little conversation about Steve Sarkisian, Quinn Ewers, the underlying disrespectful undertones that I think have gone nationwide this year in college football media. I've talked about it a little bit on a few of my previous podcasts, but going to dive deeper into how I think Sark and more so Quinn Ewers has a higher level of disrespect going into this season than people may realize. How I think that only fuels the team and specifically Quinn Ewers going into the season and my expectations of how those guys are going to respond to it, what Texas is going to do. What else? And a little conversation about college football 25. Obviously, it has just been a massive hit in America since it dropped. Millions and millions of copies were sold. Millions of people are playing it. I've been playing it since it released. Going to tell you what I love about it, which is most things, and tell you the few issues that I have with the game that hopefully can be fixed before the next game comes out. If not, when the next game comes out, just some things to think about. So let's get right into it. Josiah Sharma flipped from the University of Oregon to Texas. Texas, at one point before he made the commitment to Oregon, was the favorite to land the guy. It's a very, very important commitment in this class. Let me tell you something. When Sark got to Texas, a thing that he and the coaching staff made a huge point of emphasis on was we need bigger humans to come into this program. Obviously, shortly after Sark took the Texas job, we learned that the Longhorns were going to head to the SEC, which is now a reality. We are in the SEC. As I said, we just finished up SEC Media Days in Dallas, Texas. First time, mind you, that it was south of the Mississippi in the state of Texas in my lifetime, maybe ever, in my opinion, that they had the SEC Media Days. Wonder why that is. And yet, it was always a point of emphasis since they got here, not only to get better to compete nationally, but to prepare to get bigger to compete nationally, but to prepare to play in the SEC, where the biggest defensive and offensive linemen exist in the country, where they pump out NFL interior defensive and offensive linemen every single year. And they are doing that. They're not only doing it on the offensive side of the ball, how well they've recruited along the offensive line since he arrived, but clearly on the defensive side of the ball. I think personally, this is the type of player that is going to play on Sundays for a really, really long time if he does it right. And I mean, I heard Jerry Hamilton give a comparison to Sean Rogers. I don't think that's far fetched at all. You think about the kid, he's already over 300 pounds coming out of high school. Kids that are that big, and in general, humans that are 300 plus pounds and as athletic and explosive as this kid is, don't fall off trees. You got to jump on them. You got to get them when you see them. I think that they're always criminally underrated. And, you know, to be fair, they play less plays probably than anybody else on the field does. He's going to be a one tech gap filling type of player. So I think that that has a lot to do with the fact that you don't ever see these guys really rated as high 5 stars or top 25, top 50 players in the country. And same as in the NFL draft. Oftentimes they're late first round picks. They're not drafted in the first round just because they're not on the field as much. But it's watching after watching his film over the last few weeks and especially last night, it's just a kid that has explosive and athleticism that you don't see in that size. And the only issue that he really has that I see when watching his film is pad level. But pad level is really a problem with every single high school offensive lineman, defensive lineman. You know, I think that it's a thing that's clearly not drilled enough at the high school level, but it's sure as fuck going to get drilled immediately, a lot, and intensely when you get to the college level. His pad level is going to get fixed. Kenny Baker, coming from the NFL, made the evaluation on this kid. Obviously very important. I bet if you ask Kenny Baker, he would tell you that this kid is one of the best defensive linemen in America, not just best interior defensive lineman, one of the best defensive linemen in America. Look at this film right here. Kids like this, like he gets himself in bad position, doesn't matter. He's going to overwhelm you with his size, strength, and explosion. You don't move like this. That right there, that's the play right there. Right there. Let's go back to this. Look at this shit. 300 plus pounds. Look at this shit. You don't explode like that at 300 plus pounds. This guy right here, barring injury, knock on wood, or getting in trouble off the field, is going to play on Sundays for 10 years. Jesus Christ. The Dallas Cowboys could use this right now. Look at the fucking explosion. Looks like he gets beat here. But still, he consistently fights, has a strong high motor, and you're not going to keep him in front of you. He's just way too big and explosive. Look at this. Get off, unreal. Get off of me. Shrugs him right off. 300 plus pounds. You can't do anything about it. A lot of this film is just him looking across the guy in front of him and being like, what are you going to do about me? 300 pounds of explosive fucking nastiness coming right at you right here. What are you going to do about it? Not technical, just nasty and big. Just nasty and big. This is what SEC football looks like. This is what SEC interior defensive lineman looks like. This is what the NFL defensive linemen look like on the interior. That's how you win championships, players like that. Josiah Sharma. Massive flip. And then Kenny Baker in general. I want to talk about him. You know, Texas fans, we've lost a few recruits. We had a kid flip from Texas to LSU because Bo Davis left from Texas to LSU. Obviously, everybody loved Bo Davis a lot. And for rightfully so, right? He did an excellent job turning around the stigma at Texas, the wine and cheese culture that we had, the entitled culture that we had. He had the infamous bus rant that can really be the flag in the ground for when the program changed that first year under Steve Sarkisian, where we went 5-7. It was humiliating. We were losing every single week. It seemed like every loss went the same exact way. We started off hot and just get our ass whooped in the second half. It was culture issues, pride issues. Nobody cared. It plagued Texas for over a decade, right? He went on that bus rant. It went viral, and everything from that moment forward was really never the same. You either committed and bought into the program or you left. And there was a lot of kids that did left, and look into how they're doing right now as far as their football career is concerned. So Bo Davis was just so famous amongst the fan base and so loved and popular that in general, when a guy like that leaves, it's always going to sting. And the guy that comes in to replace him is going to have a lot to prove. And the fact that we had a kid flip from here to there and that he came from the NFL, doesn't have recruiting college experience, I think a lot of people were down on him, and I think that's ridiculous. And you should really, at this point in time, trust Sark's evaluation on coaches. The only coaches he has lost outside of the receiver coach he basically fired the first year have left because they've gotten head coaching jobs or have been making vertical moves, not lateral or downward moves in their coaching careers, right? He's losing coaches the right way because we're winning games, they're impressing people around America, and they're getting better jobs. That's how you know that you have a good coaching staff. Tony Dungy famously said that. The sign of a good coaching staff is when you're replacing coordinators, defensive coordinators, and position coaches because they're getting better jobs year in, year out, and not because you need to improve offensively or defensively, right? So you need to understand that. He's gone to the NFL before. He did it with our receiver coach. Look how that's working out. Going very, very well in recruiting and on the field. And he went to the NFL on the defensive side of the ball, hiring Kenny Baker. So Kenny Baker comes into Texas without any evaluation or any prior relationship with any of these high school kids that he's expected to recruit, right? So you can naturally expect that that's going to be a slow start. And you're probably going to be behind where there were all these established relationships, especially with Bo Davis, who was recruiting these kids for Texas. Now he's recruiting them for a different school. So you're behind the 8 ball on that. He should have a grace period in understanding that, one, he has to evaluate and find the type of players that he wants to come play for Texas that also match the way Sark wants his defense to look and his interior defensive line to look. That took a few months and times and hundreds of players that you're probably evaluating and looking at. And then establishing the relationship with not only the player, but the parents, the family, whoever else you have to establish that relationship with to lock them in. And then I talked about, on my last show, Oregon. I think Oregon is going to be very good for a very long time in the modern era of college football where you can weaponize NIL and do all of that stuff. And yet, Oregon has this element where they're very flashy, they're very fun, and for a 17-year-old kid, and now this one's from California. It's not like he's from Texas. It's not like Oregon is that far away from him as opposed to Austin, Texas. And yet, I feel like they have this nature of getting impulsive commitments from these kids. DeCorian Moore is an example. Not saying he's going to flip, and yet I don't think this is the last flip from Oregon to Texas in this class. Whether it's Decorian Moore, whether it's Dorian Brew, whether it's both of them, I don't know. Let's see what happens come December time, come football season when games are being played, when the weeks and months go where these kids aren't close to Eugene, Oregon, and they're maybe a lot closer to Texas, or in a California kid standpoint, Austin, Texas is very similar to where these kids come from. He's from Sacramento, so not really in that situation. But California to Austin is not that big of a cultural shock. Cultural shock to these players that it may be going elsewhere, right? And so Oregon is going to have to deal with the fact that, like at Decorian Moore, Oregon wasn't even really in consideration until 2-3 weeks before he made his commitment, right? When he originally made that graphic when he decommitted from LSU and Oregon was on it, I didn't even think about it, man. Like, I didn't think that was even a shot. I thought this was Texas all the way, maybe in Ohio State, maybe A&M or somebody in-state closer makes it interesting, maybe in Alabama. Never saw it happening with Oregon. He goes and he visits Oregon, I think impulsively. They did an amazing job recruiting him. As I said, Rashad Samples is over there. His dad is Decorian Moore's head coach in high school. I just think that as the long run goes on, Sark mentioned at SEC Media Days, he said, ask me about this recruiting class in December. Just because a kid commits to a school in the summertime and he announces that on social media doesn't mean that really anything in the recruitment of that player from Steve Sarkisian and coaching staff and all the other coaching staffs recruiting him around the country changes at all. In fact, it doesn't. You recruit through the whistle, as Sark says. And even if these kids committed to Texas, and like Josiah Sharma flipping to Texas yesterday, doesn't mean his recruitment's over. Oregon's not going to stop recruiting him. Alabama and others aren't going to stop recruiting him. The best schools in the country want this player for a reason because, like I said, 300-plus pound freak athletes like this don't fall off trees. They play in the NFL on Sundays for a decade until they can't play anymore. That's what they do. And there's very few and far between. There may be 3 Josiah Sharmas in all of America coming out of high school this year. There's a reason these guys have the highest price point in the transfer portal at times. You need them to stop the run. You need them to compete in the SEC. You need them to win championships. And in general, I do think Oregon, this isn't an Oregon topic, but that's a thing to keep a close eye on. Recruiting through the whistle through December. I said it a few weeks ago. I'll say it again. When it comes time to leave, Mom, when it comes time to leave everything you're close to, everything you know, and all the security blanket that exists here in the state of Texas, I get it, he's from California, but for the recruits moving forward, Texas makes a lot of sense for these guys. Makes the financial sense, makes the logistics sense, and football sense makes sense now at Texas, where it didn't under Herman and Charlie Strong for about a decade and a half, right? So, big commitment from Josiah Sharma. Very happy to the direction the Longhorns are going in recruiting. Still think they're going to reel in a top 5 class conservatively, if not a top 3 class, right? So let's move forward. They also have a lot of momentum with Jonah Williams. It seems like this is coming down to a 2-team race. Jonah Williams either going to Texas or LSU. He is one of the best baseball players in America, so it makes sense for those 2 programs. LSU, that's the 2 greatest college baseball programs of all time you're talking about. Personally, I hate to say it, I think with LSU winning that last national championship, historically speaking, they've passed Texas, but that's the only program that's in that conversation in my eyes right now. And yet, where I think Texas may have the slight edge over LSU here is not only logistically, he is a kid from Texas, as I mentioned, but the Jim Schlossnagle relationship, right? A few weeks ago, it seemed like A&M was running away with this commitment, and a big thing to do with that was Jim Schlossnagle being the head baseball coach at Texas A&M. Well, now he is at Texas, and I'll take you back to his older brother, who was also one of the best baseball players in the country, a professional baseball player now. He was at one point committed to Texas. He flipped from Texas, signed with Texas A&M to play baseball, never made it on campus because he got drafted highly like we thought Jonah Williams might do, and went straight to playing pro baseball, right? Well, who was he committed to? Jim Schlossnagle. That relationship with Jim Schlossnagle goes back, a long ways. And obviously baseball is very important to them. And then football-wise, I think the fit is better at Texas. Texas is in a better place defensively than LSU is. LSU still has some corrections to make. They couldn't stop a fucking cold last year. They had one of the worst run defenses in America, probably one of the worst run defenses in the history of the LSU football program. And in general, Texas, you would say, we are the third or fourth best odds to win the national championship, second best odds to win the conference. Clearly in a position to continue to win and chase championships for the distant future, right? So I think Texas may hold the slight edge over LSU. It's going to be a very tight race to the end. Hopefully the Longhorns land Jonah Williams. So whereas 2 weeks ago it seemed like the sky was falling in recruiting, and I told you guys to relax like Aaron Rodgers, that none of these recruitments are over. Even if they are committed to Texas, you got to recruit them through December. And let me tell you something. If the Texas Longhorns go win the SEC and they make a deep playoff run, none of these kids are going to Oregon over Texas, out of Duncanville in Houston or wherever else. Come on, give it a rest. It's not going to happen. So a lot of momentum with Jonah Williams. He's visiting right now as we speak. I don't know if he has already visited LSU or if he has one coming up. So we'll see. SEC Media Days were last week, and there was a lot of Texas conversation that came out of that, as you would expect. Nothing more so than the comments that Nick Saban made regarding the Texas Longhorns. He had made the comments that went most viral. He said a lot of things about Texas, and the 99.99% of the things he said about Texas were very positive, overwhelmingly positive. You can say he did nothing but gloat about Texas. And yet, obviously, there's a lot of people that are sour to the University of Texas and the football program, and I think there's a level of fear that exists with what this Texas football program will become if they reach their expectations this year, or dare I say exceed them, and they win the conference, or maybe win the national championship, or get there, or get to the semifinals again, right? If that happens 2 years in a row, all of the negative recruiting you had towards Texas the last 10 to 15 years is gone, right? What did you say about them? Oh, they're in the Big 12. It's not a serious conference. They'll never win a national championship over there. You want to play in the NFL, you go to the SEC. Texas is in the SEC now. In fact, like I said, they have the second best odds to win the conference. They're my SEC pick to win the conference. They're Nick Saban's pick to be in the conference championship. Nobody wants to talk about that, though, right? So you can't say that about them anymore. Oh, what has Texas done in the last 10, 15 years? They don't have a winning culture. They have an entitled culture. Well, they just won the Big 12 the last year in the conference when there was a total witch hunt from officiating and from the commissioner to make sure that didn't happen. They won it in spite of all of that. They won it in spite of getting 2 total pass interference calls with 2 of the best receivers in America going against not NFL cornerbacks week in, week out, right? They got 2 pass interference calls the entire season in the Big 12. They got 2 in the Alabama game alone, right? When they played 2 cornerbacks that are playing in the NFL going into this season. That was interesting. They still won that conference, so you can't say that anymore. Can't say they haven't won recently. Can't say they haven't put anybody else in the NFL draft. They just broke a school record for most players drafted in a single draft, right? Can't say that anymore. And in fact, Steve Sarkisian has said multiple times he expects at least 12 players to get drafted next year. That'll break the record again. So they're producing NFL football players. They're playing in the best conference in America that produces the most NFL players per capita year in, year out. All the negative recruiting you had towards the University of Texas over the last decade and a half is about to die. And that's why quotes like the Nick Saban quote, and where he said, and I'm paraphrasing, sorry, where he said, he gets a laugh out of everybody talking about how the Texas Longhorns ran things in their former conference. Well, they're not going to run things in the SEC, he said. And that went viral, and there was about a dozen plus podcasters and college football content creators that laughed about it and did their own show in reaction to it, yada, yada, yada. Well, I'm going to give you my reaction to it now. First and foremost, we're not coming over here saying we're going to run the SEC. Maybe some fans do. Maybe I've predicted us to win the conference. Maybe I predicted us to be everybody's biggest game, and Quinn Ewers mentioned that we're going to be everybody's biggest game. Yeah, well, all that's fucking true. Okay? And like I said at the beginning of the show, didn't they just have SEC Media Days in Dallas, Texas for the first time? They did, didn't they? They usually have those in Atlanta. Why did they come to the state of Texas? Surely not to just appease to their new flashy car that just came into the conference, right? Surely couldn't be that. Alabama was there too. But unlike Texas, the first 20, 30 minutes of every single segment you turned on SEC Network wasn't about Alabama. It was about the Texas Longhorns. Go back and watch it. It's all there. Go watch any day of SEC Media Days. Tell me what they talk about to start the first 30 minutes of every single show on every day. Texas, Steve Sarkisian's media availability wasn't until the last day or the second to last day. I don't remember. But they talked about Texas before and after that on almost every single segment. Wonder why. You know, what Saban was really trying to say is what I believe. It's two massive brands in the University of Texas and what the SEC is partnering. Neither one is inferior to the other. Don't get it twisted. Texas isn't inferior to the SEC, nor does Texas need the SEC. Did we need a jolt? Yeah, but we could have gone the Big Ten too if we wanted to. The SEC makes more sense. I love the SEC. I'm as big of an SEC guy as you're ever going to find. I love Texas to the SEC. I love OU to the SEC. I think it makes all the sense in the world. I think it's going to be the greatest show we've ever seen in college football. But Texas isn't taking a backseat to the SEC, just like SEC isn't taking a backseat to Texas. This is a partnership, and nobody is inferior. Right? Let's talk about some of the great things that he said, like all the gloating about Steve Sarkisian, the Longhorns roster, his predictions of what they're going to do. He predicted them to be in the SEC championship and maybe win the national championship. He only had one question. It's the question all of us have. We got to have some corners step up. We got some really, really talented guys in that cornerback room. We brought in a transfer in Javion Cole that I think is going to be a great player, right? You got senior Jade Barron that came back to establish his draft standing, try to become a first-round draft pick, a Thorpe Award winner. We'll see what he's able to do wearing the number 7 like Michael Huff, baby. Right, we got studs. Derek Williams, I think, is going to be one of the best safeties in the SEC. We brought in Andrew Makuba, 3-year starter at Clemson. Freshman All-American. Austin kid. Right? I think we're going to be fine. He just kind of mentioned that if you have bad corner play, you got to play safe, bend but don't break. You know how it goes. That's fair. But everything he else said was gloating. You would think that he thinks Texas is the best team in America. In fact, my takeaway from SEC Media Days and Nick Saban is he does think that the Texas Longhorns are the best team in America. Let me read you what he said about Steve Sarkisian. I've always hated playing against Texas, Saban said at SEC Media Days. He offered a friendly warning of sorts to another of his former coordinators, Georgia head coach Kirby Smart, saying, and Kirby has got some of the same issues. He was talking about Steve Sarkisian here, right? He said, he goes on and he mentions Sark specifically, and he says, I kind of always hated playing against Sark, Saban added, and practiced for several years, as well as when we played them the last couple of years, because they do such a good job of what I call squeeze splits. We're talking real football here, baby. You're going to learn a thing or two listening to the Shonee Jackson Show, listening to the greatest of all time Nick Saban talk, and not just picking and choosing what he says. Let's listen to the full thing, right? He said, we play in this day and age where people take these huge splits like Tennessee, which that's a problem too, that veer and shoot offense. I don't think it wins championships, but it causes problems. Saban added, but players are not used to, especially defensive backs, are not used to playing when you have squeeze splits. I can confirm that. I played defensive back. Because you put this unfamiliar position, whether it's in run support or how they cover, where they squeeze splits, how can that guy get to the side of the field quickly, which messes you up in your pattern matches? Right, so Steve Sarkisian, where he is a master, and I think this is why he's the best offensive mind in the sport, why he's the best play caller in the sport, and he's been that for over a decade. This is why Steve Sarkisian, and I'm going to get into it in a little bit, had the failures he had and was able to land at Alabama, the NFL, back at Alabama, then Texas in pretty much 5 years. Because he is the best in the country at making a defense vulnerable. He makes you vulnerable defensively. He makes the defensive backs vulnerable, and he puts you in positions that are almost impossible to win in. He does that while never killing the integrity of his pro-style concepts, run-first offense, right? So he establishes the run and always has a dominant running game. He's never gone a season as a play caller or a head coach where he didn't have a 1,000-yard rusher. Go back to that big humans concept I brought up earlier and his overall philosophy on building a running game, right? So he always has a running game. So it's an offense designed about being run first, using the play action off of that, and he has implemented the RPO offensive scheme better than most people have since that has come into play, right? And then in the passing patterns and what Nick Saban's talking about, he has a lot of mesh concepts with crossing routes, deep crossing routes that puts these DBs in vulnerable positions, especially when you're trying to play man coverage, two man, and other things, cover one, where you're getting in a foot race across the field one on one with guys like Xavier Worthy, Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle. This year going to be Isaiah Bond, Jonte Cook, some of the fastest players in the world of football. So Steve Sarkisian does a better job putting defensive coordinators on their heels from the first snap to the last than anybody in America. And Nick Saban said that's why he was his best coordinator that he ever had. And he also had Lane Kiffin, who I'm very high of, going to speak on right after this. And other very good coordinators throughout his career, obviously, right? And Bo Fisher in the early 2000s was a wonder kid. He's had some very, very good coordinators. He says Steve Sarkisian's the best. Why? Because Nick Saban as a defensive coordinator hated playing against him. Kirby Smart's going to hate playing against him. Going to get into that. So I wanted to touch on that and say that ultimately, he said mostly great things about the University of Texas. He also said when he went, he hadn't seen a better roster around America other than Texas and Georgia. He said that C.J. Baxter was the best running back he saw this spring. Called C.J. Baxter the best running back in America. I told you guys in my first episode that C.J. Baxter looked like fucking Cedric Benson in the spring game, right? C.J. Baxter was the number one running back in America, coming from a hotbed in Florida that does nothing but produce NFL football players, that Orlando area. For all the popularity that clip got about Texas not taking over shit in the SEC and not running things in the SEC, he sure had a lot of gloating about Steve Sarkisian, this Texas roster. Quinn Ewers, who I'm about to get to, he said a lot of good things about Quinn Ewers, and he predicted Texas to get to the SEC championship and maybe the national championship. And some would say that the Texas Longhorns are the reasons Nick Saban retired. Sorry, fumbling over my words a lot today. But maybe Texas is the reason Nick Saban retired. And the thought of a Texas to go along with Georgia and the other challenges he had in the SEC coming over, causing that 24/7, 365 headache in recruiting and everything else that he mentioned, right? Let's move forward. Other things in SEC Media Days. Lane Kiffin, man. First and foremost, I talked about him on the last show. I'm super high on Lane Kiffin. High on this Ole Miss team moving into the season. But Lane Kiffin showed an enormous amount of strength being days after his father, his hero, his role model passed away, and Monty Kiffin. Sark mentioned him in his comments early on, and many other coaches did. I think Florida's coach mentioned him and whatnot. Monty Kiffin's a legend, obviously. Well, Lane Kiffin did an excellent job at SEC Media Days, showing strength, stoicness in the days after his father's passing. But there's one thing that stood out more than anything, and it was his moment with a racerhead bitch-ass Paul Feinbaum. Paul Feinbaum infamously has a lot to do with why Lane Kiffin got fired at USC. This is what it was about, finding Lane Kiffin, getting a one-on-one with him in person, being able to rehash that in hindsight after digging himself out of the grave that the media and guys like Paul Eraserhead Feinbaum put him in years and years ago when he got fired from USC. The same thing that they did to Steve Sarkisian, right? Well, now he's climbed out and he gets a chance to fight back because he's got a team that has a chance to win the whole enchilada. And so I'm going to play for you a little snippet of him and Paul Feinbaum and give you my thoughts on it.
I'll steal your line, but I was going through a deep depression over this incorrect guilt that you tried to lay on me, which preceded that move. Had something to do with Southern California.
Oh, yeah. When you got me fired at USC, I got myself fired at USC, but you didn't help.
It's a better story if I got you fired.
You really did. Because it is a true story that the athletic director and the president were on that trip. We were playing that night, and you were on College Game Day, and you had to make your big splash, and they were watching it, because I know the other person in the room that was watching it with them, and you said what a joke I was, and I'm the Miley Cyrus of college football coaching, and I should be fired, and they looked at each other, and later that night I was fired.
Yeah, by the way.
So, but hey, look what happened. I would have never gotten to work for Coach Saban. All these other things wouldn't happen, so I appreciate you for helping getting me fired. Thank you.
Look at what you're doing today. You're predicted to go to the playoffs. And look at Miley Cyrus. She's had a nice comeback.
So you're wrong on that. I mean, you
That was-
put me
that
down
was-
with that. So
so
really, I don't really know what you're good at. Like you predicted that Coach Saban was done. That didn't happen. You basically said Miley Cyrus stinks, and
I did.
she's still going.
yeah. Well, anyway, it's always
That's great. Lane Kiffin's fantastic. And like I said, I think if they're in a position to compete for the conference, compete for the national championship, he's one of the best play callers in America in that top 3 category with Steve Sarkisian. He's doing an excellent job in the transfer portal. He has knocked this Ole Miss job out of the park the way I thought he would when he accepted it. And quite frankly, I think that there's been some coaching jobs that have came up in the SEC and around the country over the last few years that it absolutely blows my fucking mind that they didn't do everything they could to go get Lane Kiffin. You know what I mean? They're LSU, other jobs. I'm not saying those teams made bad hires. You know, LSU's seems to be happy with Brian Kelly as of right now. And yet, I think so highly of Lane Kiffin. I think he could coach at this level. I think he could coach at the NFL level. And he's really built for this modern era of weaponizing NIL in the transfer portal, right? But that was hilarious. He told Paul Feinbaum what I think a lot of us think about Paul Feinbaum, just a fucking joke. And guys like that in the media and the impact that they do have on athletic directors or general managers in the NFL or other things is a much larger than I think any of us have ever been willing to realize and acknowledge. Let me get a sip. And, you know, I love that a coach gets an opportunity after climbing out of that grave that Paul Feinbaum helped dig for him to clap back at him. You know, obviously, like I said, his father had just passed away. It's not like he's in the greatest mood of all time. And then he's sitting there having to do an interview with Eraserhead Feinbaum that, like he said, got him fired. That night that Paul Feinbaum basically called Lane Kiffin an embarrassment to head coaching and needs to go and compared him to Miley Cyrus, like he said, he got fired that night. Left on the tarmac. Didn't even get to fly back with the team. That's real. That happened. It was public humility beyond measure, and it extended for about a decade. It was attached to Lane Kiffin, and every single time that he came up in conversation, he was unhireable as a head coach. That was said by many, many people, and athletic directors around the country thought he was unhireable. He had to go to the Nick Saban rehab facility, and I think it's hilarious that how much he has adopted from Nick Saban in his cadence and how he delivers everything that he talks about, to even using the talking with his hands like Saban does. I talk with my hands too, but Saban infamously always, all right, talks with his hands. You know what I mean? And I've noticed over the last few years, Lane Kiffin has adopted that, his cadence and tonality and how he speaks and delivers these things. Like, I don't know what you're good at. That was so Nick Saban. But I love Lane Kiffin, rooting for Ole Miss. I hope that it's a Texas Ole Miss SEC championship. That's what I'm pulling for because I'm a massive Lane Kiffin fan. And then Steve Sarkisian's SEC media days. You know, I thought he had a great press conference. There was no clickbait from Steve Sarkisian or the Texas players, no matter how hard Tex Ags media and the rest of SEC media try to do that. And it's almost impossible because even when the Longhorns are just talking normally, Longhorns players like Quinn Ewers, or if Arch Manning loses an ID or does anything, everything that the Longhorns do is clickbait, and yet there was nothing to take away from them going to the SEC media days. I thought that it was nothing but confidence and humility from coaches and players alike. You know, Steve Sarkisian, he immediately showed gratitude to Coach Saban and talking about how he basically saved his coaching career. And I'll talk about that next when I get into my Sark Quinn Ewers disrespect. But he showed all the respect and humility to the conference, start to finish, understanding I've coached in this conference. I know what it takes to win in this conference. I know that there's a target on the Longhorns' back coming into it, and yet we're embracing it. We're confident that we're going to meet the challenge, right? He talked about his philosophy and how he constantly wants to stay on the cutting edge as a coach, and he does. Year in, year out, Sark's offense, he sticks to the integrity and the principles of his offense, like I said, and yet he improves and adds things that he sees around the country that defenses are having a hard time stopping, right? So I'm excited to see what Steve Sarkisian adds to his already spectacular offensive scheme. Is it stuff from the NFL? Is he taking more things from Kyle Shanahan and Mike McDaniel, some of his friends and peers that coach in the NFL and do such a great job innovating offense? Is he taking from Lane Kiffin or maybe Kalen DeBoer, who we lost to in the playoffs? Is he taking some stuff from him? Who knows what he's going to do? Can't wait to see it. Is in the running game and the passing game. He talked about that. He talked about the improvement in the pass rush and how he can't wait to show that this year with Trey Moore, obviously 5-star plus Colin Simmons, guys that are developing behind them that have been at Texas. Like the Westlake kids, Barron Sorrell going into his third year of playing a lot for the University of Texas. How much better is he? Can he make that jump to become a day 1, day 2 draft pick or a day 2, round 2, round 3 draft pick in Barron Sorrell? Ethan Burke, you know, the list goes on and on. We got a much better pass rush improved. Can't wait to show that off. And then the development of the interior guys like Vernon Broughton and Alfred Collins. You need to realize that those guys were very highly recruited. And players like Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy didn't start until their last year at Texas, right? That's a big boy position. You got to develop the strength and the man strength to play it first and foremost. And then, like I mentioned with Josiah Sharma earlier, a lot of times these massive 300-pounders out of high school or interior defensive linemen got a lot to work on with footwork and pad level because it's not worked on enough at the high school level or trained on enough, right? So it's natural for these interior guys to develop later. I don't think we're going to have an interior defensive line problem at all. So if that's what you're praying for, pray for something else. And then I think that he just oozes confidence in his quarterback, Quinn Ewers. This is a guy in Steve Sarkisian that's had a lot of really good first-round NFL quarterbacks that he's coached over the years. And I think he's just as confident as Quinn Ewers as he's ever been in any quarterback that he's ever coached. You know what I'm saying? So that's what I took away from his press conference, the players' press conference. But let's talk about Steve Sarkisian and Quinn Ewers' disrespect that I think exists going around the country. It's undertones, underlying disrespect. I understand what our odds are, how they're high at the University of Texas. I get Quinn Ewers' Heisman odds are pretty high. I'm not talking about odds makers. I'm not talking about Las Vegas. I'm talking about talking heads on podcasts and on national networks around the country. I can't help but notice every single time I listen to anybody talk about either of the two, there is just this undertone of doubt for both of them. Like they didn't already answer that last year, right? Steve Sarkisian's resume is not to be fucked with by anybody in America. As a coordinator, as a quarterback coach, as a head coach to this date right now. He had one blip in his career. That happened at USC. He had some personal downfalls and failures that ended his time at USC. We all know USC. We all know about it. You can go look into it. It's not hard. And if you're a sports fan, a college football fan, you know what I'm talking about. That was a personal collapse. It was not a coaching collapse. Okay? He recruited, excuse me. He had the number 1 class in America at USC, and that class was so fucking good that it got Clay Helton the coaching extension. It put Clay Helton into an early retirement. He made so much money off of that buyout from USC to get Lincoln Riley because of the recruiting class that Steve Sarkisian brought into USC and the roster that he built. That was everything to do with any of the success in the Rose Bowl that Clay Helton won at USC. Steve Sarkisian is what turned around the USC program following the sanctions that happened over the Reggie Bush scandal, the Pete Carroll thing, and all that, right? Steve Sarkisian had USC primed and ready to go into the direction that he asked Texas to go into that direction. It fell apart for him personally. He had to gather himself, get himself together. And like I said earlier, there is a reason that he fell at Alabama in the Nick Saban rehab facility. And then he was able to take over as the play caller as soon as Lane Kiffin left. Then he got a job in the NFL with the Atlanta Falcons after they went to the fucking Super Bowl and lost Kyle Shanahan because he got a head coaching job in San Francisco. You know, they hired Steve Sarkisian. They could have hired anybody. They had the NFL MVP and all that. And let me tell you something. That didn't fail because of Steve Sarkisian. It fell because of Dan Quinn as a head coach. And let's see if he's able to correct what he failed at in Atlanta while he's in Washington. That doesn't really matter to me right now. But Steve Sarkisian did fine in the NFL. They put up numbers, and that's where he started his all gas, no brakes mantra. Then he goes back to Alabama as the offensive coordinator, and his 2020 season is the most dialed season I have ever seen a play caller ever in my life, and that was right after the 2019 LSU offense. The 2019 LSU offense might have overall been better, but when you're looking at just play calling and execution from a coach, the way that Steve Sarkisian was dialed that year, I don't think could be matched by anybody ever in the history of time. And that's why he got the University of Texas job when Urban Meyer fumbled that opportunity, right? And we can all in hindsight acknowledge that. His dumbass messed up and fumbled that. Look at Steve Sarkisian compared to Urban Meyer now. Steve Sarkisian is going to pass Urban Meyer's legacy. hot take or not, he's going to pass Urban Meyer's legacy when it's all said and done. Because guess what? His life is together. His issues that he had personally, it seems like he's been very intense and intentional on correcting those issues day in, day out. He's very vulnerable and vocal about those things, which I think creates even more trust and rapport with the players he recruits and coaches and their families over the years. That's only going to grow and grow and grow as he is consistent with that, and he's consistent with winning and churning out NFL football players. As I said, he expects 12 players to get drafted next year from the University of Texas. He is more tapped into that program, obviously, than anybody in the world because it's his program. He has coaches that have all coached in the NFL or at the highest level of college football, rainmakers in recruiting like Jeff Banks, Tashard Choice, Kyle Flood. He had Bo Davis, many, many others. Terry Joseph's making a name for himself like that. Our receiver coach is becoming a rainmaker in recruiting. But guess what? His system and philosophy recruits itself because all it does is put up numbers and crank out NFL quarterbacks, receivers, running backs, offensive linemen. You know what I'm saying? He also learned from the two greatest coaches of all time in college football, in my opinion, and Pete Carroll and Nick Saban. Pete Carroll didn't have a long enough tenure to be put in that conversation enough, in my opinion, but what he did at USC is one of the greatest jobs done ever in college football. He almost had a three-peat at USC. That program was far and above the best program in America. They were just an NFL football team playing in college, right? That's where he started. He learned under Pete Carroll. He was a fucking prodigy. Let me tell you something. After personal failure, most people aren't getting called by the NFL. Right? He got those jobs not because he's privileged. He got those jobs because he's a prodigy. And he was a prodigy under Pete Carroll. Every single coach that he has coached under or coached with, even after his personal failures, did nothing but support and gloat for the man and say that they were rooting for him to come back, saying they knew he would make it back. And he did. He learned under him and Nick Saban. And you know what Steve Sarkisian's ceiling is as a head coach? His ceiling is being the greatest college football coach of all time. That's the type of ceiling he has. That's not hyperbole. That's not a hot take. That's legitimately his ceiling. We talk about what he hasn't done. Nobody mentions he's still younger than most coaches around the country at most major programs in America. He's just now turning 50 years old, or he's in his early 50s. Right, he got his first head coaching job at 36. The disrespect for him isn't warranted. It's because of where he's at, not because what he's done. His issues were like substance abuse issues. He didn't beat women. He didn't do something horrific that you can't forgive. He just had an issue. He was going through a divorce. He had some mental problems. He ran into them. He's overcome it. He's back on his feet, and he's thriving. Your disrespect is out of fear, just like it is with the next guy I'm going to talk about, Quinn Ewers. You want to talk about constant overrated undertones that are unwarranted and ridiculous about a player? Quinn Ewers is 21 years old. Let me tell you something. The improvement in the changes that Quinn Ewers has made from the time he early enrolled at Ohio State, transferred into Texas, that was a kid that was trying to find himself with the mullet, with everything else. So when you heard him speak, he sounded immature. Not in a bad way. He just sounded like an 18-year-old, 19-year-old kid that hadn't found his way yet since he left his nest at home, right? That first 6 months at Ohio State was nothing but a culture shock and probably uncomfortable for Quinn. He got there 2 weeks before the season started. It's not like that Ryan Day or anybody at Ohio State had any time to be intentional with his development during that 6 months. That was all going to start in the following spring. He wanted to come home, to get closer to home, be where he originally committed in Texas, be closer to his family, obviously, but also be closer to all of his coaching and training that exists in the Southlake, Texas area, right? So if you hear him talk now compared to then, you're just talking to a grown man compared to a boy. You can hear it in his voice and his energy. He's not a boastful, loud guy, but he carries a quiet confidence that you see and feel off of his energy when he walks into a room. Anybody that's been around him will tell you that, right? And then the other thing that kind of bothers me is when you see these quarterback lists around America and other podcasts that I like to listen to, like Snaps with T-Bob A. Bear and Aaron Murray and Josh Pate or, any of them, you name it. Oftentimes, they constantly rate Quinn Ewers behind Carson Beck and Shadur Sanders. Let me tell you something. Why in the fuck is nobody saying that it is a fact that Quinn Ewers is more proven than both of those guys? Since when? Like, why is Carson Beck being anointed QB1 in the SEC and in college football? If not, it's Shedeur Sanders. Why is either one of them being rated higher than Quinn Ewers? Neither one of them ever a day in their life have been as talented as Quinn Ewers, or have they been better than Quinn Ewers on or off the fucking football field. Let's stop kidding ourselves. I got all their splits pulled up right now. I'm going to talk about it. But Quinn Ewers is a generational, all-time, one of the highest-rated quarterbacks in the history of recruiting and rating quarterbacks. Okay? They were not. He comes in. I just mentioned his story at Ohio State to now. His freshman year was up and down. They didn't start major college football and Power 5 conference at the quarterback position when Quinn Ewers did as a redshirt freshman. They didn't. They were both, one, Shedeur Sanders was at Jackson State playing in the SWAC, and Carson Beck was sitting behind Stetson Bennett, and nobody even thought Carson Beck was going to be the next starter. Shout out to him for winning the job, but Carson Beck is not on Quinn Ewers' level talent-wise. Never has been, never will be, neither is Shedeur. Okay, let's talk about their splits. Quinn Ewers a year ago, he missed, 3 games, and then came back a little early, so there was really a game or two of getting back into things. He had 3,400 passing yards, 22 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 78.3 QBR. 17th in America on the QBR. All right, before Quinn Ewers got hurt and before the OU loss, Quinn Ewers, like, if we don't lose to OU in a very fluky, close game and he doesn't get hurt, he probably would have won the Heisman Trophy. If not, would have for sure been a finalist. Let's talk about his game against Alabama, because we're going to compare him to Carson Beck right after this. 24 for 38, 349 yards, 63.2 completion percentage, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Should have had 4 touchdowns, 1 was dropped. Everybody brings this up, and everybody brings up the fact that Quinn Ewers in big games just hasn't done enough. He doesn't have these gaudy stats. That's a fucking lie. That's just a lie. Quinn Ewers, that was his stats against Alabama. Quinn Ewers versus Oklahoma, 31 of 37. He had an 83.8% completion percentage against Oklahoma. After the second drive of the game, the ball basically did not touch the ground. Quinn Ewers was light years ahead of Dillon Gabriel as a player in that game and every game since then and before then. They're nowhere close to the same player, just like Carson Beck isn't the same player as Quinn Ewers. He had 346 passing yards and a touchdown. His QBR was 76.5. That's with 2 turnovers. Okay, that was the next most important game of the year. Let's talk about Texas Tech, a game we lost a year ago. The offseason waves and stories of Joey McGuire and everything he said. 17-26 for 196, 1 touchdown. We won that game 57-7, ran them over. Maybe a bad example. The Big 12 championship game, that's a pretty big game. Conference championship game, that's a pretty big game. He goes 35 for 46, 452 yards, 76.1 completion percentage, 4 touchdowns to 1 interception, 62 was the long. Say what you want about Oklahoma State. They were the number 18 team in America. They beat Oklahoma, who we lost to, which is why they were in this game. We beat them 49-21. He had 452 yards and a 76.1 completion percentage. What the fuck are y'all talking about when you're saying Quinn Ewers doesn't play good in big games? Washington, he had a 55.8% completion percentage. He started a little slow. I'll admit that. Coverage was tight. They played very, very good. He finished very strong against Washington. As I said, he gets in a moment and he clicks in every single game. And once he clicks and he gets dialed, the ball doesn't stop touching the ground. Let's talk about Carson Beck. Carson Beck splits. 3,900 yards, 24 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 86 QBR. All right? So his QBR was the only thing higher. His touchdowns, he only had 2 more. And as I mentioned, Quinn Ewers missed 3.5 games. He only had 2 more touchdowns. Quinn Ewers missed 3.5 games. He only played 1 playoff game. It's not like he caught him in the playoffs. 3,900 passing yards. So he had 500 more passing yards than Quinn Ewers? 400 something more passing yards than Quinn Ewers? But in everybody's list, Carson Beck's number 1. You listen to these SEC talking heads, Carson Beck's better. How did Carson Beck do against Alabama? Their one common opponent. They had one common opponent. It was Alabama. I just read you Quinn Ewers stats. I'm going to read them again just to make it fresh on your mind. Quinn Ewers versus Alabama in Tuscaloosa, mind you, not a neutral site. Not a neutral site. In Tuscaloosa. 24 for 38, 349, 63% completion percentage, 3 tutties, no picks. Carson Beck versus Alabama, neutral site SEC championship game. 21 of 29, 243 yards, 72.4% completion percentage, no touchdowns. I just watched every throw of Carson Beck versus Alabama a few days ago, and this is really what sparked me wanting to have this topic and this conversation. If you watch every play Carson Beck versus Alabama and then watch every play Quinn Ewers versus Alabama, there's no scout, no general manager, no coach in America, no logically thinking person that's going to say that guy's better than that guy when referring to Carson Beck over Quinn Ewers. Nobody is. Everybody can see who's the more dialed, more calculated, quicker, better quarterback in Quinn Ewers. Every now and then Quinn Ewers gets happy feet, just like every young quarterback in America that is generationally gifted like he is does, right? But his jump from year 1 to year 2 was massive, and I think year 2 to year 3 will be even bigger and what will make him the best quarterback in America. Let's talk about Shedeur Sanders. Actually, let's stay on Carson Beck. All the big games that he played. He had some good games. Ole Miss, 18 of 25, 306 for 2 tutties and a pick. This SEC East schedule was a fucking joke. That's going to end as well. Nobody wants to talk about that with Carson Beck. That cupcake SEC East, that was the elephant in the room constantly with the Georgia program, right? Hold on, I'm pulling up their schedule this year just quickly so I can talk about it. That doesn't exist anymore, brother. That doesn't exist because you play Clemson the second week of the year in the non-conference. You actually have a non-conference game worth talking about this year. Your second conference game is in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Okay? Going to play one of the best defenses in America. Second conference game. And then you got to go to Austin, Texas on October 19th, followed by Ole Miss 2 games after that, Tennessee. So this is the hardest schedule that Oregon's had in 15, 20 years. It's not the same schedule last year. It's not a bad Auburn team that you only beat by 7 points going 23 of 33, 313, a touchdown and an interception. It's not like he has any games where he's putting 4 or 5 touchdowns on anybody's head top. Mind you, he had the best tight end in the last 15 years of college football and a dominant running game and a dominant offensive line going against teams that they are very superior to. They run into Alabama, and he looked average. So we'll see. They get the chance to match up this year. Shedeur Sanders, 3,200 passing yards, 27 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 63.1 QBR. I understand they're not as good as the Texas Longhorns, but they were in the worst, most cupcake pussy conference in America. Right? Quinn Ewers had more passing yards and 5 less passing touchdowns. A better QBR than Shedeur Sanders. Why is Shedeur Sanders ahead of Quinn Ewers on everybody's mock draft, on everybody's quarterback list? Is it because you guys actually think Shedeur Sanders is better than Carson Beck? That he's actually better than Quinn Ewers? Is it because you actually think Carson Beck is better than Quinn Ewers? Or is it because you're scared of what will become of Texas with having the best quarterback in America? Maybe a Heisman Trophy winner? God forbid, the number 1 overall pick in America, with Arch Manning lurking behind him. I think it has a lot more to do with the fear of what Texas is going to become if Quinn Ewers is what I think he is than it has to do with people actually thinking Quinn Ewers isn't that good. But I just read you off his stats of his biggest games. I would say the biggest games he played this last year was Alabama, the Big 12 championship, and Washington. And Oklahoma. Alabama, Oklahoma, Big 12 championship in Washington. And if you want to take it a step further and talk about his games against all ranked opponents, let's do it. Alabama, 349 yards passing, 3 touchdowns. Kansas, number 14, 24 team in America. They were very good. They beat Oklahoma. He 325 yards passing, 71.4 completion percentage, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. 40 yards rushing against Kansas. Oklahoma, I just said it. 31 for 37, 346 and a touchdown. Oklahoma State, Big 12 championship, 452 yards, 4 touchdowns. He broke every Big 12 passing record that there was in the Big 12 championship game in the first half against Oklahoma State. But he doesn't play good in big games. 318 and a touchdown in the playoff game. Almost brought us back to win the game. Would have won the national championship because we matched up greatly against Michigan. Quinn Ewers is going to be the best quarterback in America. Quinn Ewers is going to win the Heisman if he stays healthy. Quinn Ewers is going to be the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. Bookmark it, clip it. Quinn Ewers is the man. Let's move on. Carson Beck also is a horny guy. If we're just talking about leadership at the quarterback position, I don't think you can play the quarterback position horny and win the SEC. That's just my opinion. Let's bring this up. Remember this from last year? Last year I was out on Carson Beck because of this Snapchat. Okay? You can't be this horny and win the SEC or be an NFL quarterback. And Quinn Ewers got all the shit in the world for his mullet and being a little immature as a freshman. Quinn Ewers hasn't had an ounce of immaturity since his freshman year, and his freshman immaturity doesn't come close to the freshman immaturity I had and most college freshmen, especially athletes of his status, have, right? Here's a snapshot of Carson Beck that got screenshotted by a chick. Here's what it says. I'll read it and I quote, you're right, that's my B. It's probably because I'm so lost in how good you look. He went on to say, not trying to be weird, but especially when your tits are out, gets my shit on hard immediately. Not trying to be weird, but your shit gets my heart, your tits get my shit on hard immediately. I've never had it put that way. I've never heard anybody put it that way. So when that came out a year ago, I was like, this isn't going to work. The Carson Beck thing's going to be a failure. Too horny to play quarterback. I got over it because they went to the SEC championship, right? On top of that, he just bought a Lamborghini Urus. $300,000 Lamborghini Urus. He's driving fast cars. Georgia's not beating the reckless driving claims, the culture claims anytime soon. Your quarterback just bought a Lamborghini Urus. Fine motor. Very fine motor. I like it just as much as the next guy. Pass rushers, linebackers, receivers, running backs, corners, tight ends. Driving a Lamborghini Urus, cool. My quarterback, no. I like that Quinn Ewers drives a Chevy truck. Or maybe it's Ford. I forget who he has all his sponsorship deals with. Right? I like my quarterback to be a little bit on the safer side of things. So he's horny. He drives fast cars. And then the other thing, he's dating one of the Cavender twins. Not the greatest picture of all time of her. Look at him. That's a nice Jesus piece. He dresses like a receiver, a defensive back, a linebacker, not a quarterback. That's beautiful. Beautiful Jesus piece. I'm not going to lie. I love Jesus. But not beating my horny claims, dating one of the Cavender twins. You know who else is dating one of the Cavender twins? Jake Ferguson, my man Jake Ferguson, the Dallas Cowboys tight end. My guy, who I like a lot. Like I said, I like that out of my tight ends. Not my quarterbacks. You can't play quarterback horny. You can't play quarterback horny. Let's finish the show on College Football 25 review. College Football 25 came out. Massive hit. Man, it's had a grip on all men, all college football fans like myself since it dropped. I've been a fan of the game since I was a child. It's the very first game I ever started to play with my dad and his friends when I was younger. They used to create me on the game. It was fun. Let's talk about the good parts first. Obviously, the presentation, the atmospheres that they were able to capture nationwide. Chef's kiss through the roof. Unbelievable how they were able to capture the uniqueness to every university, the atmospheres in every conference at every school. Knocked it out of the park. The players, they look so real. The realness of the game. I like the gameplay a lot, the movement. I've adapted to the tackling and the defense for the most part. It's very good. I like it. I think it plays good. I think it plays realistically for the most part. Obviously, there's some OP teams online and whatnot, and yet I think the gameplay is very good. They're improving it from what Madden has been. And by the way, I think Madden's going to use the same engine. It is the same company. But I think the gameplay is very good. I like the kicking thing, how they've made it difficult. I love all of that. I like the journey and dynasty that you go on as a coach. I think that the job offers you receive are realistic. I think that the recruiting, that they did a great job, although I would love to see on the next game for there to be a bigger impact NIL-wise. I would like to actually be able to some way negotiate things to tamper in a way with players. I understand as you upgrade your coach and stuff that there's stuff that you're able to see, like who wants to enter the portal and whatnot. But to really be able to weaponize NIL instead of the way it's designed in the game. I would like to see that more implemented in the game on the recruiting side of things. And really, the biggest complaint I have of anything is the simulation is broken. Like, if you just flat out simulate, and then in general, the computer players that you're not controlling, like Georgia's gone 6-6 like 5 times in my dynasty and fired like 3 coaches. Right, Texas has fired like 2 or 3 coaches, going like 6-6. And then I've played Troy in the semifinal games, BYU in the national championship. My first year in Dynasty, I started at Sam Houston State. So obviously, I didn't win the championship playing on All American Heisman rankings, or difficulty rather. And Tulane blew out Oklahoma State in the national championship. So, like, I'm fine with schools like that making the playoffs, but in the simulation, like, when Georgia is like a 95 overall and Tulane's an 83, Tulane should not be blowing them out ever. There's no circumstance, especially on a neutral field, but no circumstance ever where that level of discrepancy should happen as often as it's happening in the game. I hope that they could fix the simulation issues prior to the next game coming out, but if not, that's the thing to work on. And then Road to Glory wise, I think that they did an excellent job. They can expand on it a little more. I hope that Madden really dives into that and makes that maybe the vocal point of their game. I think college wise, Dynasty should always be the main thing. And yet, since you can connect the two, I think that they did a great job with the role playing aspect of your Road to Glory player, with the academic aspect, the building your brand, the NIL. I wish that they put that NIL and brand building stuff more into Dynasty, since you already got it coded in Road to Glory. Add that into Dynasty. Add it with the coaching stuff. I would like to see like coaching interviews. And EA Sports, I believe, makes the F1 racing video game. You're able to meet with other F1 teams and tamper with them and get a raise out of your team and stuff on that game. I would like to see that on the college game. Like, let me take an interview with another team and then decide to stay with mine, maybe get a raise and an extension from my current program, right? Or the way that you're able to enter the transfer portal as a player, like just create some type of tampering text messages from your agent of so-and-so, it seems like Georgia or Florida is interested in you right now. Is that a job you would like to take? I can get the ball rolling on the negotiation side, that type of thing. You know, and this is rich people problems with the game. That's fantastic because it's been an absolute home run. But I would like that a little bit more. And then Quinshon Judkins being a combination of Reggie Bush and Barry Sanders is fucking nuts, because I love the kid. Very explosive, great football player. Ohio State got them a good one in Quinshon. And yet, he's not even their starting fucking running back. He's the most dominant player in the game. He's literally Barry Sanders, Reggie Bush together in one player. So that was just interesting. But, you know, I get it. A video game's going to do that, and players will update and whatnot. And that spin thing, that platinum spin trait that he has is just unstoppable. But other than the NIL thing and the simulation problems, like, the game, it just knocked it out of the park. Bravo, tip of the cap to EA Sports. They did a fantastic job. The game has had a grip on me since it came out, and every other fan of it since then. I know of it. I'm in like 2034 of my dynasty, and hopefully, like, when I get a better setup and whatnot, I can start streaming the game. But till then, you know, that's my review on it today. I love it. This was episode 7 of the Shonee Jackson Show. I hope you enjoyed it. If you do enjoy my content, please remember, like and subscribe to the videos. Also, send it to your friends the way you send other stuff to your friends. If it's good and you enjoy it, there's somebody that you're friends with that would also enjoy it. And that's what's going to help me grow this channel, ultimately reach my goals of monetizing it, and, you know, getting some checks coming through talking about football and sports. Other than that, I love y'all more than you know, not as much as you think. God bless and have a great day.